I'd been a babysitter for years, working with several different companies and hundreds of families. This was just another job on a Thursday night. I drove to the house, getting there exactly on time, and met the parents. They were having a date night at a concert downtown and would be gone for 5 to 6 hours. It was nearly 6:30 already, so this was a late job. They introduced me to their son, Jay, who was 10. He was very talkative and seemed to enjoy my company. When the parents left, he was excited to show me his video games and have me be his audience while he played. He played for around 2 hours before I started getting hungry. I continued to let him play in the living room while I made something to eat in the kitchen. I spent maybe 5 minutes heating up a meal, but then all of a sudden, when I got back, Jay was different. He wasn't talking anymore and he seemed really shy. I tried starting up conversations, but he would barely respond. I had no idea what happened. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded. I didn't want to be bothering him about it too much, so I pretended like nothing was wrong and I watched him play some more. Once 9:30 came around, I told him it was time for bed and made sure he got ready. He was still acting weirdly, trying to avoid me and delay going to bed for as long as possible. Finally, just before 10 p.m, he got into bed and I went downstairs and sat on the couch. I was replaying the whole night in my head, wondering what went wrong, but there didn't seem to really be anything that I did. I left him alone for a few minutes while I made food and that was it, like he just flipped a switch. While I was thinking on the couch, I heard Jay upstairs. He was walking down the hallway and then he opened the door. I quickly went upstairs to see what he was doing, but he wasn't in the hallway. I opened his door to his room and there he was, just sitting on the bed, as I had left him. "What are you doing, Jay?" I asked, nicely. He looked scared of me. After no response, I decided to let it go and began walking out of the door, but then he said to me he had to use the bathroom. I said okay and let him go down the hall, but while he was in there, I took a look around his room. It all looked like an ordinary 10-year-old boy's room, and just as I was walking out, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I looked over and right by the closet, I could see someone's eye looking back at me through the crack in the door. I hesitated. Then I walked out of the room and closed the door. I listened, and I didn't hear any movement in the room. As soon as Jay came out of the bathroom, I told him to be quiet and rushed him downstairs and into my car. I dialed 911 and we waited for them to show up. I asked Jay if he knew who was in the house. He was quiet and not responding to me at all. When the first officer came, he went right into the house and caught the man walking around upstairs. He looked like a 30-year-old creep. When questioned, the man said that he was a friend of Jay's and that Jay even let him in the house to babysit for the night. Strangely, when the parents got home, they basically pushed me away and didn't give me any more updates on what happened. There was obviously something really weird going on because Jay was very scared of him. I don't know if they knew each other or if this was a first-time encounter, but I hope it was all dealt well with by the police. When I was 16, my parents made me get a job. They were tough like that, and made my older brother do the same when he turned 16 as well. He got a job in retail working as a cashier for some tech shop, but I wanted to do anything other than that. The only thing that caught my attention was babysitting. I had younger cousins that I enjoyed being around, so I thought it wouldn't be so bad. There was a company in my town that I applied for, and after a short interview, they offered me a position. It wasn't a very normal hiring process, at least I don't think. Once hired, they took some photos of me and had me fill out a bio of who I was, and then they posted me on their website as a babysitter. I waited. A few weeks went by and nobody booked me. My parents told me to be patient, but I was already looking for other jobs. Until one day, I finally got a notification that someone had booked me for the full night and morning, meaning I would have to spend the night there and continue watching them in the morning. It was on a Saturday, so I didn't have school, but spending the night somewhere else felt strange to me. I arrived at the house at the scheduled time of 10 p.m. I met the dad at the door who invited me in. He was an older man in his late 50s. He told me that his daughter was only 4 years old. He showed me to the kitchen where he had me sit at the table with him and talked to me for a good 25 minutes. He asked me all about myself and I wasn't sure if this was normal or not for parents to do when hiring a new babysitter, but I went along with it. At some point I realised I hadn't even met or seen his daughter yet, so I asked where she was. He said that she was upstairs in her room sleeping and that I wouldn't have to worry about watching her until the morning came. Then he got up abruptly and said he had to go and would be back around about 11 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. He stepped out and left me standing there a bit confused. None of this felt like I thought it would. The first thing I did after he left was walk around the bottom floor. I forgot to ask where I was supposed to sleep or if there was any food for me to make or any games for us to play. Probably all the questions an experienced babysitter would have asked right away. As I walked around, I began wondering where all the kids' stuff was. He said his daughter was 4, so I expected a mess of toys all over the house, but there wasn't a single toy in sight. I even checked in a few drawers that looked like they might have some, but there weren't any. The fridge and cabinets didn't seem to have much kid food either. I realised that this was off to a really bad start. I just needed to relax. I decided I would text the dad in the morning and ask him about the food and stuff, but for now I would just make myself a spot on the couch and sleep. I found the blanket and used the couch pillow, then turned off the lights. I tried to sleep for nearly 2 hours, but there was something off about the house that just kept me up. Then, at 1 a.m, I heard something click on the other side of the house. I shot up and I looked across the room. The whole house was quiet now. I was sitting up for a full minute until I heard the back door slide softly open. My heart was pounding as I got up and I went into the hallway that had a clear view of the back door. I was confused to see the dad with his back to me while he was trying to softly close the door behind him. I believe this is the moment that I had to process everything before he saw me, was likely the reason for my escape. As he turned and saw me, I started running for the front door. His footsteps followed behind me, rushing down the hallway and yelling at me to stop. I ran for my car and got in. The dad wasn't far behind, banging on my window as I backed out of the driveway. While running away was a smart decision, the next one wasn't so much. I didn't say anything about what happened. I think I was worried that I had done something wrong or messed up as a babysitter somehow. A month later, though, I finally told my parents and they said it was too late, but I should have reported it. It was an obvious red flag that the men didn't contact the company that I babysat for, practically showing that he was guilty of something. I'm sure there was no daughter, and no reason for me to be at his house, other than for some sick plan that he had set up for me. I hired a babysitter for my 6-year-old a few months ago. I used a website to hire the same young girl every time because she was familiar with my son already, and on this night though, she wasn't available. I had to be somewhere at 5 and only needed someone to watch my son for a few hours, but there was only one babysitter able to come at that time. It was a 17-year-old boy named Ben, who looked quite nice in the pictures. I scheduled him to be here at 4:30, then waited. At 4:30, I had my son turn off his video games so that I could introduce him to Ben, but he still didn't show. I was watching out of his window for his arrival, but at 5, I called the website and asked where he was, and they told me that he clocked in on their app, supposedly meaning he'd arrived and was already babysitting. After discussing it a bit more, they cancelled it and apologised, but said no one was available to cover him. I was really angry, being forced to cancel my plans. At 6, I made dinner for myself and my son, and we started watching a TV show together. In the middle of the episode, there was a knock on the front door. I paused the show and went up to look through the peephole. A guy was on the porch, and I saw his car parked in our driveway as well. I opened the door. "Hi, I'm Ben," he said. I gave him one of those, "Are you serious right now?" looks. "You're over 2 hours late, just go," I said, closing the door in his face. Not the nicest thing to do on my part, but I was honestly even more upset that he chose to show up still. I sat back down and played the show again. After a couple of minutes though, I checked the window and saw that his car was still there in the driveway. A cold rush ran through me. I went back to the door and looked out the peephole. It was dark, and at first I didn't see anything, but then, at the very bottom of the peephole, I saw him. He was standing very still, pressed all the way up against the door, like he was listening. I watched him for a few seconds, so creeped out that I was just in a state of shock. I must have been visibly so, because my son called out to me in a worried voice. I snapped out of it and backed away, telling my son to go to his room and lock the door. I called the police, but I think Ben heard. He knocked on the front door, then the doorknob rattled, and he banged on the door again. I heard his footsteps move around to a nearby window, followed by him trying to pry it open. I ran around the house to make sure that everything else was locked, then joined my son in his room. While we were waiting for the police, 5 long minutes passed before I heard sirens. They approached the house, and when they pulled up, Ben was apparently sitting in his car pretending like he was happy to see them. He made up a whole story about me being crazy and said he was just here to babysit at his scheduled time. His lies didn't last after I showed them the confirmation email saying he was supposed to come 2 hours ago. The next few weeks were overcomplicated, but at the end of everything, not much happened. Ben lost his job, but aside from that, nothing else was really done, because he denied everything. It's really scary because if he had shown up on time, then I would have left him alone with my son. I don't know what he was trying to do, but I'm glad that I didn't have to find out. My name is Dot, and I'm 22 years old. I'm from North Dakota, and I have a lot of tattoos. I got my first when I was 17. Shout out to the tattoo artist who knew the idea wasn't mine, but inked me up anyway. And after that, I got hooked. I got a sleeve over the course of about 9 months during my late teens. I got my neck covered with a skull and flower motif. I got a wolf covering pretty much my entire right thigh. I even got a small face tattoo. Provocative, I know, but in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. I know some people look at me and think I'm some kind of trashy meth head loser or something, but once you get to know me, people realise I'm smart and loving and thoughtful, and the ink has no bearing on my actual personality, and I make a great babysitter. I know I'm great with kids, and all the families whose kids I took care of learnt that for themselves after taking a chance with me. Maybe that makes me sound kind of full of myself, and I hope it doesn't, and I'd like to think it's fully justified, given some of the cruel things that have been said about me over the years. And this brings me to my next point. I don't think I'm the prettiest girl in the world, but the extent of my tattoos sometimes has a certain effect on men. I don't want to go into too much detail about what those entail, but I'm sure you can all guess if you apply a little imagination, but I really, really hate some of the lewd and inappropriate comments I get when someone with no mouth filter sees my ink. At best, it's just annoying, and a guy quickly gets the message when I tell him to stick his non-compliment where the sun doesn't shine. But then, at worst, men can get very, very frightening when they're not used to being told no. This story involves one of those. In May of 2019, I was on my way to see one of my regular babysitting jobs on a humid Friday night, and I needed to stop at the gas station to top up my tank. I live in quite a rural area, and despite the gas station being a pretty regular stop for me, it's the only one for miles and miles around. So while it gets its fair share of regulars, it gets plenty of visitors who aren't from the area, and sometimes they're not even from the Rough Rider country at all. They're just passing through. I'm guessing this guy was just passing through because I'd never seen him before, and he was wearing a black Minnesota Vikings cap. And I don't know if it was because I was hungry or generally in a grouchy mood, but when he started slurring lewd comments my way, I gave him the business particularly harshly. I told him I was probably his daughter's age, assuming he had one, and asked how he'd like it if a guy started talking to his little girl the way he was talking to me. He then made some comments about how he'd never let his daughter, guessing he did have one, quote unquote, ruin her body in the way that I had. And comments like that used to hurt me, but not anymore. They're like water off a duck's back these days. So I told him to go jump in a lake. A nicer version of what I actually said. I don't want to get this video taken down, so I won't say it. And then I just paid for my gas and drove off. I didn't think I was being followed, but then again, I don't think I looked in my rearview mirror the whole freaking drive home. Like I said, I live in a pretty rural area, and unless you pass through a small town or whatever, there's not much need to actually check your rearview. So when I got back to the place I was babysitting, I had absolutely no idea what was to befall me that night. Not a single clue. So it was with blissful ignorance that I parked my car, knocked on the door, then went inside to chat with the mum and said hi to the little man. A few hours go by and I mostly occupy myself by playing Nintendo Switch games with the little guy. Anyway, at about 10 p.m, I take the little guy to bed and read him a story until he's snoozing soundly. After that, I help myself to some of the leftovers that the mum had left me, and then I settled onto the sofa and watched TV and text my friends. And right about then is when I hear a knock at the door. I get up to answer it, kind of nervous about who it might be, but still aren't wanting to refuse, just in case it's important or something. But then, when I open the door, there's no one there. Kids play pranks, right? And even though it's a rural area where the houses are sometimes like a half a mile apart, it could just have been as easily a bunch of kids who cycled over just to get up to no good, right? That's what I told myself anyway. I'm not the type to freak out over a game of ding-dong ditch, so I just closed the door, muttered something about dumb kids under my breath, and went back to watching TV. Not long after, it happens again, only the knocking on the front door is even louder this time, and kind of interspersed too, like some kid was kicking the door or something. I got really mad, thinking it might actually wake the little guy upstairs, so it would be super difficult to get him back to sleep. So this time, I opened the door and took a few steps outside, and looked around to see if anyone was watching. Hiding in the darkness. There was no one in sight, but I definitely wanted to warn the kids off from doing it. So in a loud voice that I tried to keep low enough not to wake the kid up from upstairs, but loud enough for anyone close to hear, I told whoever it was that if they bashed on the door like that again, I'd be calling the cops. In the moments after I spoke, nothing moved, nothing stirred. There was just this dead silence hanging in the air, which actually started to creep me out. After a while, it was obvious that whoever had done it was still close. I didn't hear any bikes pedaling or voices or anything like that. I knew someone was there, maybe even watching me too, so feeling pretty exposed, I turned around to walk inside the house. I can't really describe the kind of terror I felt when I turned around and I saw that black Vikings cap staring me right in the face. Even with the lessons in writing I got, I'm still struggling to find the words to describe that sensation. All that cliched stuff like, my blood ran cold, or a shiver went up my spine, Sounds like stuff out of a campfire story compared to what actual heart-pounding terror I felt. I think the first thing I felt was my heart just thumping at a mile a minute as I got this "oh no" alarm bell in my head. I was outside alone with this guy who had been making lewd comments to me at the gas station, who had obviously followed me to this family's house, maybe even thinking that that's where I lived. The next thing I know, his big calloused hand just flies up towards my throat and I almost feel all my air cut off. I have to make these scary sounding wheezing noises just to get air into my lungs. I remember how my hand shot up to his wrist, trying to pull his hand away from my throat, but he was just too strong for me to even budge it. I kicked out at him and tried to hit where it would hurt him the most, but my first and only effort landed on his thigh. After that, he held me out at arm's length, so I couldn't reach him, and every time I tried to kick him again, I not only missed completely, but he would squeeze a little harder just for a second, so I couldn't breathe at all. In the end, I was basically just hanging there, feet only touching the ground because I was on my tiptoes, and he started smiling at me. I don't want to repeat exactly what he said, like I mentioned earlier. I don't want to get the channel into any trouble with the YouTube, but I remember every freaking word. He basically said that a girl like me should know better than to talk to a man like I had, and that he would take a great deal in pleasure of teaching me a lesson that I should have learned years ago. He made some comment about how he'd had to wait quite a while to make sure I was home alone, but he was glad he did, because now no one would be able to stop him from doing what he was doing. He said that he was going to do, like I said, I don't want to quote the guy, mainly for the sake of my own mental health at this point, but trust me when I say that his description of the act that he wanted to perform on me was graphic to the point of nauseating. Again, I could barely describe the feelings that boiled up inside me, knowing that he was about to do those things to me right there in the driveway, and honestly, the only consolation was that I might not have had to be awake for it, as breathing was so hard by this point, I felt like I was about to pass out. The guy then basically threw me onto the front lawn, which had been slightly out of sight of the road outside thanks to this big hedge the family had been cultivating over the years. The entire North Dakota Highway Patrol Force could have driven by and never seen a frickin' thing. I was basically screwed, in more ways than one. Then, right as the guy was standing over me, I heard this little voice bark, "Leave her alone!" from the doorway to the house. It was the kid I was babysitting. The little man, who had somehow woken up during everything that was going on, heard the guy talking and then headed downstairs to see what was going on. I don't know exactly what was going through the guy's head after seeing a little kid watching what he was about to do. Like I said earlier, I'm almost certain that he had kids of his own, but it was enough to make him think twice. He backed off a little and told me that I was the luckiest little girl on the face of the earth, then started telling the little man that I was babysitting that he was helping me up because I'd fallen down. The kid didn't buy it for a second though, and I've always been amazed at how brave he was in that moment, as he once again let out this impossibly loud bark for how small he was, saying, "Leave her alone!" I was already scrambling back to the house by the time the guy started walking out of the driveway, and all I had going through my head was to get 911 dispatcher to listen as I read out the guy's license plate. I didn't know where he'd parked, but they had to be close enough, and all I needed to do was get to my phone fast enough, and I'd be able to get this guy arrested. Sadly, I wasn't fast enough, and by the time I rushed back out onto the road outside, all I could see was a flash of the guy's rear lights in the distance before they faded into nothingness. I managed to tell the dispatcher as much as I could, including what he looked like, and the stretch of highway I figured that he might be driving down. But since I have no idea what car he was driving, I guess it wasn't enough for the cops to get him on a traffic stop or anything. After the call ended, I tried my best to protect the little guy from the horrifying truth of what actually happened. But he was smart enough to know that a bad man had come to the house, and that for a few moments, both of us had been in a terrifying amount of danger. He was still awake when his mum and dad got home, but they could just tell instantly that something bad had happened. Their only issue was that I hadn't called them to tell them what had happened, but I just didn't want to ruin one of their rare date nights, given that no one actually got hurt. I mean, I had one heck of a bruise around my throat the next day, but aside from that, I got away pretty much unscathed. Now that I look back on it, I don't think the guy ever really had the intention of truly hurting me. I guess if he was psycho enough to do something like that, I don't think he'd have really cared if the kid was watching. I just think having a teen girl give him some disrespect made him really, really angry, and maybe he was just having a bad enough day that he felt like taking some spite out on me or something. I have no idea, but then again, I've always been inclined to see the best in people, and I'm still something of a perennial optimist, so maybe I'm wrong in that instinct. Maybe it was just the little man who saved me from a horrific fate that night, and that a 6-year-old had way more strength, power, and bravery than anyone might assume.